1959 was the year Walt Disney released what is now highly regarded as one of the most treasured of all animated classics, Sleeping Beauty. Unless you've been living under a rock your entire life, we all know the story. A baby princess is cursed to an endless sleep on the day she turns 16, and only true love's kiss may break the spell. Aside from the great animation and the fantastic score, the one aspect that every fan remembers the most about the film is the main villain, Maleficent. Voiced by the terrific Eleanor Audley, this character practically redefined the term Disney villain long after the movie was first released. She was so cool that many of us kinda wish the story centered around her instead of the two boring leads. And sure enough, the folks over at Disney thought the same thing, as we now have our long-awaited live-action retelling of Sleeping Beauty, told through the eyes of our very own Mistress of All Evil. And let me tell you, when I first heard that they were doing a live-action movie based on Maleficent, I was a little skeptical at first, up until on-set photos of Angelina Jolie in full-on makeup and costume appeared online and gave me quite a bit of hope. I mean, the look is absolutely spot on, and they seem to have found a capable actress to play the part, so what could possibly go wrong? Well, let's look at the story. The new film begins with a lifelong romance between a young Maleficent, a winged fairy guardian of an enchanted land, and a young Stefan, an orphan boy with dreams of ruling an entire kingdom. Opportunity arises for Stefan many years later when a dying king declares that whosoever vanquishes the powerful Maleficent will be the next heir to the throne. And in an instant, all those years of love and affection are tossed out the window as Stefan drugs Maleficent to sleep and removes her wings from her back to prove his worthiness to the king, which leaves us with Maleficent feeling betrayed, heartbroken, and craving for revenge. So that's what leads us into the story we all know from Sleeping Beauty, right? Well, not quite. Sure, we get the famous christening scene where Maleficent curses the newborn Princess Aurora to a sleep-like death, but not long after that, her evil motives start to slowly fade away once she begins to grow a motherly attachment towards Aurora from infancy to adulthood, which is one of the many problems I had with this movie. But let's address a few other misgivings in the film. For starters, this marks the directorial debut of Robert Stromberg, who had previously worked as both a production designer and visual effects supervisor on such films like Avatar, Alice in Wonderland, and Oz the Great and Powerful. And sure, there are moments in Maleficent where the imagery does come across as artistically pleasing, but most of the time, the film is so jam-packed with CGI gimmickry to the point where nothing in it looks real or convincing. Hell, even the creature designs feel uninspired. The worst of the lot being the three fairies. I mean, they looked absolutely hideous. Every time they came up on screen, I wanted to swat them away with a fly swatter. But it's not their frightening looks that threw me off the most, it's how poorly written they were. In the original, they were practically the main characters who thought up many clever ways to counter Maleficent's curse and ultimately help out in defeating her. Here, they're just a bunch of bumbling idiots who contribute absolutely nothing to the overall plot. Which brings me to my next complaint. The story doesn't make any sense. For example, the first half is completely devoted to the relationship between Maleficent and Stefan, and by the time he betrays her, the movie makes no hesitation in declaring him the main villain. Why? Why give the downfall towards villainy to a guy whose motivations change at the drop of a hat and whose accent rivals Sean Connery's Egyptian Spaniards from Highlander?
How revolting!
There's a few other things like that in the film that don't add up, like Maleficent being allergic to iron, almost like it's kryptonite, her riding a horse even though she could teleport in the original, using her staff as a blunt instrument even though she could use magic, giving her raven servant all the cool stuff to do, including turning into a dragon, having the film's prince show up only to give misdirection to a crucial plot point. I could go on, but I'll just conclude by saying my biggest problem with the film. Making Maleficent a sympathetically scorned victim as opposed to a ruler of darkness. I mean, I don't mind seeing her backstory as a decent young child, as long as we ultimately see what makes her the person we all know from the original. But sadly, the filmmakers don't follow through with that. Instead, they wanted to cash in on the success of both the stage musical Wicked and last year's Frozen by turning arguably the evilest of all Disney villains into a simple misunderstood softie.
How do you f that up?
So yeah, if you haven't already guessed by now, I really dislike this movie. At 98 minutes, this was one of the most uninspired, joyless, and downright boring exercises of effects-filled movie making I've seen so far this year, with performances so wooden and completely devoid of life, and a script so underwritten it rivals that of a middle schooler's essay. Now, I could certainly understand the appeal of updating a classic story for a new generation of audiences, But when it comes down to changing the evil nature of a character like Maleficent to the point where she's now portrayed as an emo Mary Poppins, I'm sorry, that's a massive fail in my book. So on a scale from 1 to 10, I'm giving this film a 1. And that concludes our show. I'm the host, and I will see you next time on another Midnight Movie Madness.